Sign these papers right now, Natalia, or you'll spend Christmas in court fighting for scraps, my mother-in-law Vivienne hissed, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany dining table as she slid the inheritance transfer documents toward me. Behind her, my sister-in-law Cordelia smirked while casually flipping through what looked like bank statements, her emerald bracelet catching the light from our Christmas tree as she handled my late grandmother's financial records like they were already hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my Christmas Eve would end like this. Cornered in my own dining room, still wearing the red velvet dress I'd put on for our family celebration, watching the two women who were supposed to be my family plot to steal everything my beloved Grandmama Rose had left me. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was my grandmother's final gift, her way of ensuring I'd never have to depend on anyone again. She'd seen how Vivienne treated me, how she'd spent 5 years trying to convince my husband Derek that I wasn't good enough for their prestigious Ashford family name. The Christmas lights twinkled mockingly in the background as Vivienne's cold blue eyes bore into mine. "This can be civilized, Natalia, or it can get very messy very quickly," she continued, her voice carrying that familiar tone of aristocratic authority that had intimidated me for years. "Cordelia needs this money for her new art gallery in Manhattan. As family, you should want to help her succeed." I forced myself to stay calm, even as my heart pounded against my ribs. The documents in front of me weren't just papers. They represented $4.2 million in assets, including Grandmama Rose's brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, her stock portfolio, and the antique jewelry collection that had been in our family for generations. Everything she'd worked her entire life to build. Everything she'd specifically left to me, because she trusted me to honor her memory. "I don't understand," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Grandmama Rose left this inheritance to me. Why do you think you have any right to it?" Cordelia let out a sharp laugh, her platinum blonde hair shimmering as she shook her head. "Oh, please, Natalia. Everyone knows you manipulated that sweet old woman into changing her will. A home health aide convincing a lonely widow to leave her fortune to a stranger? It's practically elder abuse." My chest tightened with fury. "Don't you dare. I wasn't just her caregiver, I was her friend. I was there every single day for 3 years, reading to her, cooking her favorite meals, listening to her stories about the old neighborhood. You visited her twice in 5 years, Cordelia, twice." But Vivienne waved her hand dismissively, her diamond wedding ring catching the light. "Regardless of your relationship with Derek's grandmother, Cordelia is blood family. She deserves security, especially with her divorce proceedings draining her resources. This is about doing what's right for the Ashford legacy." The word legacy tasted bitter in my mouth. In Vivienne's world, I'd never been part of their precious legacy. I was the working-class girl from Queens who'd somehow captured her son's heart, the woman who'd trapped Derek with love, instead of a trust fund. She'd made it clear from day one that I was temporary, disposable, just waiting for Derek to come to his senses and marry someone from their social circle. "Where is Derek?" I asked, suddenly realizing my husband wasn't here to witness his mother and sister attempting to rob me blind. "Does he know about this ambush?" Vivienne's smile turned predatory. "Derek understands that family loyalty comes first. He agrees this arrangement benefits everyone involved." The words hit me like ice water. He knew. He'd agreed to let them corner me on Christmas Eve, probably while he was conveniently visiting his old college friends in the Hamptons. "I had such high hopes when Derek married you," Vivienne continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I thought you might learn to fit into our world, contribute something meaningful to our family's standing. But this selfish refusal to help Cordelia proves what I've always suspected. You'll never be one of us." Cordelia stepped closer, her expensive perfume overwhelming as she placed her hands on my shoulders with unsettling firmness. Sign the papers, Natalia. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Think of it as your Christmas gift to family. I stared down at the documents, Vivienne's smug face blurring as betrayal and anger clouded my vision. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about putting me in my place once and for all. Vivienne had spent years trying to undermine my marriage, and now she thought she'd found the perfect way to force me out of their lives for good. And if I refuse? I asked quietly, though I already suspected what was coming. Vivienne leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then I'd hate for the state nursing board to receive some concerning reports about your conduct as a home health aide. Amazing how easy it is to find irregularities in patient care records when you know the right people to ask. My head snapped up. That's impossible. My record is spotless. I've never had a single complaint. Perhaps, she replied sweetly, but in today's litigious world, even unfounded accusations can destroy a career. And with my connections on various hospital boards, I doubt you'd get the benefit of the doubt. Cordelia resumed her casual examination of the bank statements, humming, quote, "Silent Night" under her breath, as if she were opening Christmas presents instead of dividing up stolen wealth. Think of it as an investment in family harmony, she chirped cheerfully. I clenched my fists under the table, Grandmama Rose's voice echoing in my memory. Never let anyone make you feel small, my amour. You're stronger than you know. But this wasn't just about feeling small. I needed to be smart, strategic. They'd underestimated me before, assuming the quiet home health aide from Queens would never fight back against their old money power plays. My fingers curled around the pen as an idea began to form in my mind. Let them think they'd won. Sometimes the best defense was letting your enemies believe they held all the cards, right up until the moment they realized the game had changed completely. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the papers, watching as Vivienne's triumphant smile spread across her face like poison. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weight of the pen in my hand felt impossibly heavy, as memories of how I'd ended up in this nightmare flooded back. Just 18 months ago, I'd been living a completely different life, one where I actually believed I belonged in the Ashford family, where Derek's love felt genuine, and where Grandmama Rose was still alive to protect me with her fierce loyalty and sharp wit. I'd met Derek 3 years earlier at Mount Sinai Hospital, where I was working as a certified nursing assistant while finishing my degree in healthcare administration. He'd been visiting his grandmother after her minor heart episode, looking lost and overwhelmed in the sterile hallway. Most of the Ashford family treated the hospital staff like invisible servants, but Derek had been different, or so I thought. He'd asked about Grandmama Rose's care with genuine concern, thanked me by name, and even remembered to bring coffee for the night shift nurses. "You're the one who makes her smile," he'd said during one of his visits, watching as I helped his grandmother with her physical therapy exercises. "She talks about you constantly. Natalia this, Natalia that. I haven't seen her this happy since my grandfather passed." That should have been my first clue about the family dynamics. Grandmama Rose had been married to Derek's grandfather for 52 years, but after he died, the Ashford family had essentially warehoused her in a series of expensive care facilities. They visited on holidays, sent expensive flowers on her birthday, and congratulated themselves on their filial duty while she withered away from loneliness. When I became her primary home health aide, I discovered a woman who was sharp as a tack and desperate for genuine connection. Born Isabella Rodriguez in Puerto Rico, she'd immigrated to New York in the 1950s and worked 2 jobs while putting herself through night school to become a bookkeeper. She'd met Thomas Ashford when he was a struggling young lawyer, and their love story had scandalized his upper-crust family just as much as mine was scandalizing them now. They never forgave me for not being one of their debutante princesses, she'd told me one afternoon, as we sat in her sunroom, watching the boats on the East River. Vivienne thinks she's the first woman to marry into this family who had to prove herself, but I've been fighting that battle for 60 years, am I more? She'd insisted I call her Grandmama Rose instead of Mrs. Ashford, and over the months, she became more than a patient. She became the grandmother I'd never had. My own family had been small and scattered. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, leaving me to navigate the world alone with nothing but student debt and determination. "You remind me of myself at your age," Grandmama Rose had said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Smart, hardworking, and too good for the people trying to make you feel small." When Derek finally asked me out, she'd been delighted. "About time that boy showed some sense," she'd laughed. "You're exactly what this family needs. Someone who understands what really matters." The courtship had felt like a fairy tale. Derek was handsome, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. He'd grown up privileged, but claimed to be different from his family's shallow social climbing. He talked about wanting to use his law degree to help people instead of just accumulating wealth and status symbols. I should have paid more attention to how he acted around his mother. Even during our engagement, Vivienne had made her disapproval crystal clear, with 1,000 small cuts. She'd accidentally scheduled family events when I was working, made comments about my interesting accent when I spoke Spanish with the household staff, and constantly reminded everyone that I came from such a different background. "I just want to make sure Derek knows what he's getting into," she'd said sweetly during our engagement party, as if I weren't standing right there. "Marriage is so much more successful when couples share similar experiences." But Derek had defended me then, or at least I thought he had. Now I wondered if those defenses had been more about his own image than protecting me. The golden boy of the Ashford family couldn't admit he'd made a mistake, so he'd played the part of the devoted fiancé while secretly harboring doubts. The wedding had been beautiful and completely controlled by Vivienne. My suggestions were politely dismissed, my guest list edited for space, and my cultural traditions deemed too ethnic for the Ashford family's Episcopal ceremony. I'd convinced myself it didn't matter because Derek and I were building our own life together. Grandmama Rose had been my only ally through it all. At the reception, she'd pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "Don't let them change you, mi nieta," she'd whispered, using the Spanish word for granddaughter that always made my heart swell. "Promise me you'll always remember who you are." She'd grown weaker over the past year, but her mind remained razor-sharp until the very end. During her final weeks, she'd made me promise to continue my education, to never let anyone make me feel inferior, and to remember that true wealth came from integrity, not bank accounts. "I'm leaving you everything, Natalia," she'd said during one of our last conversations, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because Derek doesn't deserve an inheritance, but because I know you'll honor what I've built. You understand the value of hard work, of earning what you have." The will reading had been a shock to everyone except me. Grandmama Rose had left Derek a modest trust fund, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to coast through life. The bulk of her estate, including the brownstone where she'd lived for 40 years, came to me with one condition. I had to use part of it to finish my master's degree and build a career that would make me financially independent. "She was trying to protect you," the estate lawyer had explained privately. "Mrs. Ashford was very concerned about your marriage. She wanted you to have options." Now, sitting at this Christmas Eve dinner table with documents that would steal away Grandmama Rose's final gift of love and protection, I finally understood what she'd seen that I'd been too naive to recognize. The pen trembled in my hand as Vivienne's impatient sigh filled the silence. "Really, Natalia, it's just paperwork. You're acting as if we're asking you to donate a kidney." But we both knew this was about so much more than money. This was about erasing Grandmama Rose's final act of love, about putting me back in my proper place, about proving once and for all that girls from Queens didn't belong in the Ashford family legacy. I looked up at the Christmas tree we decorated together just days ago, when I still believed Derek loved me enough to protect me from his family's cruelty. The ornaments Grandmama Rose had given us glittered in the light, each one carrying a memory of her stories about Christmas traditions from Puerto Rico. "You know what, Vivienne?" I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're absolutely right. This is just paperwork." And with that, I began to sign, watching as both women's faces lit up with premature victory. They had no idea that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who's been underestimated her entire life. As I set the pen down, Vivienne's triumphant smile spread across her face like she'd just won the lottery. She snatched the documents with unseemly eagerness, her eyes scanning the signatures with the precision of a hawk examining its prey. Behind her, Cordelia had already moved to the sideboard where she'd spread out what looked like real estate listings and bank account summaries. My inheritance, cataloged and divided before the ink was even dry. "Finally, some sense," Vivienne murmured, sliding the papers into her Louis Vuitton briefcase with practiced efficiency. I was beginning to worry that Derek had married someone completely unreasonable. But Cordelia was just getting started. She pulled out her phone and began making calls with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. "Marcus?" "Yes, it's Cordelia Ashford Wellington. I need you to expedite the gallery lease paperwork. The funding just came through." No, the full amount. 4.2 million, liquid assets by January 2nd. My stomach lurched as I realized she wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance. She'd already spent it. The art gallery in Manhattan wasn't some distant dream. She had architectural plans spread across the dining table, lease agreements ready for signature, and a contractor standing by to begin renovations. "You've been planning this for months," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as the full scope of their conspiracy became clear. Vivienne laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, darling, we've been planning this since the day that will was read. Did you really think we'd let some little nobody walk away with the Ashford family fortune?" She gestured dismissively at the papers. "Thomas built that wealth over decades. It belongs with his blood relatives, not some opportunistic caregiver who manipulated her way into an old woman's affections." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, but Cordelia's casual indifference was somehow worse. She'd moved on to scrolling through her phone, showing Vivienne photos of expensive furniture and artwork like they were planning a birthday party instead of destroying my life. "Oh, Mother, look at this Basquiat painting that's coming up for auction next month," Cordelia chirped, holding up her screen. "It would be perfect for the gallery's opening exhibition. The seller is asking 1.8 million, but with Grandmama's connections in the art world, I bet I can negotiate it down to 1.5. "Grandmama's connections?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You mean the woman you visited twice in 5 years? The woman whose funeral you left early because you had a spa appointment?" Cordelia's perfectly contoured face twisted with annoyance. "I was grieving in my own way, Natalia. Not everyone processes death by hovering around a deathbed like some Victorian mourner." She turned back to her phone with calculated dismissal. "Besides, Grandmama would want her money to create something beautiful and lasting, not fund some little girl's community college dreams." The insult hit its mark, but what stung more was the casual way she erased Grandmama Rose's final wishes. The inheritance hadn't been about money. It had been about love, about ensuring I had the freedom to build a life on my own terms. But to them, it was just another asset to be redistributed according to their social hierarchy. Vivienne pulled out her own phone and began making calls with the efficiency of a military general executing battle plans. "Jonathan? It's Vivienne Ashford. I need you to fast-track a property transfer." "Yes, the Brooklyn Heights brownstone. We're selling immediately, and I want it listed before New Year's Eve." My heart stopped. "You can't sell Grandmama Rose's house. That wasn't part of the agreement." "Actually, it was," Vivienne replied coolly. not even bothering to look up from her phone. The inheritance transfer includes all assets, including real property. Cordelia needs liquid capital for her business venture, not some crumbling old brownstone in an increasingly questionable neighborhood. Questionable neighborhood. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. That house has been in your family for 40 years. Grandmama Rose raised Derek there, hosted Christmas dinners there, built a lifetime of memories there. Cordelia rolled her eyes dramatically. Exactly. It's old, outdated, and probably needs hundreds of thousands in renovations. Much better to sell it to some tech millionaire who can afford to modernize it properly. She gestured around our current dining room with its crystal chandelier and oil paintings. This is what old money looks like, Natalia. That Brooklyn house was just Thomas being sentimental about his immigrant wife's preferences. The casual racism in her tone made my blood boil, but Vivienne was already moving on to her next target. She'd pulled out a thick folder filled with what looked like legal documents and financial statements. Not just mine, but Derek's as well. While we're handling family business, Vivienne continued, spreading the papers across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. There are a few other matters to discuss. Derek's trust fund, for instance, has been performing quite well, but his spending habits since marriage have been concerning. She slid a bank statement toward me, and I saw months of withdrawals I didn't recognize. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together. Charges from jewelry stores for pieces I'd never received. Hotel bills from weekends when Derek claimed to be working late at the office. Derek has been maintaining certain friendships that require discretion, Vivienne explained with clinical detachment. Victoria Pemberton, for instance, has been quite understanding about the temporary nature of his marriage. But she deserves some security for her patience. The world tilted on its axis. Victoria Pemberton, the society blonde Derek had dated before me, the one Vivienne had always considered perfect daughter-in-law material. The expensive charges weren't random spending. They were evidence of an affair that had apparently been ongoing throughout our marriage. You knew, I whispered, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal. You all knew. Cordelia actually giggled. Oh, sweetie, we orchestrated it. Did you really think Derek would throw away his entire social standing for someone like you? Victoria comes from the right family, understands our world, and most importantly, she's willing to wait until this little experiment runs its course. Vivienne nodded approvingly at her daughter's candor. Victoria has been remarkably patient. But now that the inheritance matter is resolved, we can begin transitioning Derek back to a more appropriate arrangement. You'll receive a generous divorce settlement, of course, enough to start fresh somewhere more suited to your background. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The inheritance theft wasn't just about money. It was about eliminating my financial independence, so I'd have no choice but to accept whatever settlement they offered. Without Grandmama Rose's legacy, I'd be exactly where they wanted me, desperate, powerless, and grateful for whatever crumbs they threw my way. The preliminary divorce papers are already drawn up, Vivienne continued, pulling yet another document from her seemingly endless briefcase. Very generous terms, considering the circumstances. A small monthly stipend, health insurance for 2 years, and enough cash to relocate to, well, wherever people like you go when these arrangements end. Cordelia had moved on to planning her gallery's opening party, scrolling through her contacts with the enthusiasm of someone planning the social event of the season. I'm thinking February for the launch, after the holidays but before the spring art season really kicks off. Martha Stewart's event planner is available, and I can get the mayor to come if we make a substantial donation to his re-election campaign. She looked up at me with feigned sympathy. You could come if you want, as a guest, of course. It might be nice for you to see what your grandmother's money accomplished, something lasting and meaningful, instead of just funding another working-class person's delusions of grandeur. I stared at these two women, one who'd given birth to my husband, another who shared his blood, and realized I was looking at pure, calculated evil. This wasn't just greed or snobbery. It was systematic destruction designed to erase me from their world while making me grateful for the privilege of being discarded. But as I watched them divide up my life like vultures picking over carrion, something cold and hard settled in my chest. They'd made one crucial mistake in their careful planning. They'd assumed I was the same naive girl who'd married into their family 3 years ago. They had no idea who I really was, or what I'd learned during those long hours sitting beside Grandmama Rose, listening to her stories about surviving in a world that didn't want her to succeed. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my veins. "This arrangement will work out perfectly for everyone." Vivienne's smile widened with satisfaction, completely missing the steel beneath my words. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Natalia. It really is better for everyone when people know their place." Just as I thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, Vivienne's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. Her already smug expression transformed into something positively predatory as she read whatever had just arrived. "Perfect timing," she murmured, showing the screen to Cordelia, who clapped her hands together with childlike glee. "What now?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Vivienne turned her phone toward me, revealing a series of photographs that made my blood freeze. They showed me entering and leaving various locations around the city: the bank where Grandmama Rose's accounts were held, the lawyer's office where the will had been read, even the small Puerto Rican restaurant in Queens where I'd taken Grandmama Rose for her favorite pasteles during her final months. "My private investigator has been quite thorough," Vivienne explained with clinical satisfaction. "Amazing what a camera with a good zoom lens can capture these days. That photo of you leaving First National Bank with what appears to be a briefcase? The timestamp shows it was 3 days before Rose's death. Very interesting timing for a healthcare worker to be conducting banking business, don't you think?" My mouth went dry. I was picking up documents she asked me to retrieve. Her arthritis made it difficult for her to write, so I helped her with paperwork. "Of course you did," Cordelia chimed in sweetly. "Just like you, helped her change her will, helped her transfer assets, helped her make all sorts of decisions. While she was medicated and vulnerable, the state attorney general's office has been very interested in elder abuse cases lately, especially ones involving significant financial manipulation." Vivienne pulled out another folder, this one thick, with what looked like medical records and official documents. Dr. Patterson's notes from Rose's final months make for fascinating reading. Multiple references to confusion, disorientation, and memory issues. Strange that someone in that condition would make such dramatic changes to legal documents, don't you think? "That's not what those records say," I protested, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how naive I sounded. These people had connections everywhere: doctors, lawyers, investigators. If they wanted medical records to tell a different story, they probably had the power to make that happen. "Actually, they say exactly what I need them to say," Vivienne replied with chilling calm. "Dr. Patterson is on the board of 3 hospitals, where my foundation has made significant donations. He's also up for a department chair position that requires unanimous board approval. Amazing how people's memories can be refreshed when their careers are on the line." The systematic nature of their planning was becoming clearer with each revelation. This wasn't just about stealing money. They'd been building a case to destroy me completely, ensuring that even if I tried to fight back, I'd be facing criminal charges instead of civil litigation. Cordelia had pulled out her laptop and was scrolling through what appeared to be social media profiles and news articles. "The beauty of the digital age is how quickly information spreads," she said conversationally. "One well-placed story about a home health aide who took advantage of a beloved grandmother, and suddenly everyone remembers seeing the warning signs." She turned the screen toward me, revealing a draft article with the headline, "Healthcare Worker Accused of Elder Abuse in Multi-Million-Dollar Inheritance Scandal." The byline belonged to someone named Patricia Kellerman at the New York Observer, a society journalist who specialized in scandal stories about New York's elite families. Patricia's been sitting on this story for weeks, waiting for the right moment, Vivienne explained. Amazing how patient journalists can be when they know they're getting an exclusive. This will run in tomorrow's online edition, then the print version on Sunday. Perfect timing for maximum social media impact. I scanned the article in horror, recognizing quotes that had been taken completely out of context, photographs that made innocent interactions look suspicious, and anonymous sources who painted me as a calculating predator who'd systematically isolated and manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. But none of this is true, I whispered, though I knew the truth was irrelevant at this point. Truth is such a flexible concept, Cordelia replied with a shrug, especially when you control the narrative from the beginning. By the time any corrections could be made, your reputation would be beyond repair. Who's going to hire a healthcare worker accused of elder abuse? What nursing board would maintain the license of someone under criminal investigation? Vivienne was already making another call, her voice crisp and businesslike. Detective Morrison, it's Vivienne Ashford. I need to report suspected elder abuse and financial exploitation. Yes, I have extensive documentation. No, this is very time-sensitive. The suspect may be planning to flee with the stolen assets. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized she was actually calling the police. This had moved beyond threats into active prosecution, with evidence that had been manufactured and witnesses who'd been bought. The beautiful thing about elder abuse cases, Vivienne continued after ending the call, is that they're almost impossible to defend against once the narrative is established. Elderly victims can't speak for themselves, medical records can be interpreted multiple ways, and juries are very sympathetic to stories about predatory caregivers taking advantage of vulnerable seniors. Cordelia nodded enthusiastically. Plus, the media loves these stories. Remember that case in Connecticut where the home health aide convinced that old man to leave her everything? She got 15 years in prison, and her family lost their house paying for legal defense. Very cautionary tale. The walls seemed to be closing in from all sides. Criminal charges, media exposure, professional destruction, financial ruin. They'd crafted a perfect storm designed to leave me with no options except complete surrender. Of course, Vivienne continued with false sympathy, if you were to cooperate fully with the investigation, admit that you made some poor decisions, return all the assets voluntarily, and agree to a quiet divorce settlement, the prosecutors might be willing to work out a plea agreement. Probation instead of prison time, community service instead of a felony conviction. And all you'd have to do is disappear, Cordelia added helpfully. Change your name, move to another state, start over completely. It's really quite generous, considering the alternative. I stared at these two women who'd spent months orchestrating my destruction with the cold efficiency of executioners. They'd thought of everything: legal angles, media manipulation, professional sabotage, even criminal prosecution. Every avenue of escape had been systematically blocked. But as I sat there listening to them detail my complete destruction, something unexpected happened. Instead of the despair they were clearly expecting, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. They'd revealed their entire hand, shown me every weapon they planned to use, explained their strategy down to the smallest detail. In their arrogance, they'd made the classic mistake of underestimating their opponent. They saw a frightened healthcare worker from Queens, but they had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd spent 3 years learning from a woman who'd survived decades of exactly this kind of systematic persecution. You know what? I said quietly, standing up from the table with newfound composure. You're absolutely right. This is exactly what needs to happen. Both women looked momentarily surprised by my calm acceptance, but Vivienne quickly recovered her smug satisfaction. I'm so relieved you're being sensible about this, Natalia. Fighting us would have been unpleasant for everyone involved. Especially for you, Cordelia added with a cruel smile. Prison orange really isn't your color. I looked around the dining room one last time, at the Christmas tree with its carefully curated ornaments, at the family photos that had never included me, at the two women who thought they just delivered a killing blow. "You're right," I repeated, my voice steady as steel. "This is going to work out perfectly." But as I walked toward the hallway to get my coat, I caught my reflection in the antique mirror by the door. For just a moment, I saw not the defeated woman they expected, but something far more dangerous. Someone who'd been taught by a master how to survive in a world designed to destroy her. Grandmama Rose's voice echoed in my memory. "The most dangerous opponent, mi amor, is the one who lets you think you've already won." They had no idea the game was just beginning. I retrieved my coat from the hall closet with deliberate slowness, my fingers trailing over the red wool fabric that Grandmama Rose had helped me pick out last winter. "For a woman who deserves to feel beautiful," she'd said, insisting on paying despite my protests. Now, as I slipped it on, I felt like I was putting on armor for the final battle. "Before I go," I said, turning back to face Vivienne and Cordelia, who were already celebrating their victory with champagne they'd apparently brought for this exact moment, "I need to understand something. When did Derek first contact Victoria about rekindling their relationship?" Vivienne paused mid-sip, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone delivering a final cruel blow. "Oh, darling, Derek never stopped seeing Victoria. We simply allowed him to explore his curiosity about you for a while. Consider it his charitable phase." The words should have devastated me, but instead they felt like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. So this whole marriage was just entertainment? Cordelia giggled, already slightly tipsy from the champagne. "Not entertainment, education. Derek needed to understand what it felt like to marry beneath his station, so he'd appreciate what he had with Victoria. Think of yourself as a cautionary tale that served its purpose." "And the timeline?" I pressed, genuinely curious now about the scope of their deception. "When did you start planning to take the inheritance?" "The moment that ridiculous will was read," Vivienne replied without hesitation. No Puerto Rican immigrant's charity case was going to walk away with Ashford family money. "We gave you 18 months to enjoy the fantasy. But Christmas seemed like the perfect time to return reality to its proper order." I nodded slowly, as if processing this information for the first time rather than confirming suspicions I'd harbored for months. "And Detective Morrison? He's already prepared to arrest me based on your report?" "Within hours," Vivienne confirmed proudly. Amazing how quickly law enforcement responds when the complaint comes from someone with proper social connections. "By tomorrow morning, you'll be in custody, and by Sunday, your face will be on every news website in the city as the healthcare worker who stole Christmas from a grieving family." Cordelia was already scrolling through her phone, showing Vivienne's social media posts she'd pre-written to accompany the news story. "I've been building the narrative for weeks. Poor Grandmama Rose, taken advantage of in her final months by someone she trusted. The photos I posted of her looking frail and confused during your visits will be perfect evidence of her diminished capacity." "You photographed her without permission?" I asked, though by now nothing should have surprised me. "I photographed family gatherings," Cordelia corrected smugly. "If you happen to be manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman in the background, well, that's hardly my fault. The timestamps alone will be damning. Every visit you made corresponded with some financial transaction or legal document change." I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through my own photos from the past year, images of Grandmama Rose smiling as we cooked together, laughing at old movies, teaching me to embroider traditional Puerto Rican patterns. In every photo, she looked alert, engaged, happy, but I realized now that context wouldn't matter once their narrative took hold. "The beauty of digital evidence," Vivienne continued, "is how easy it is to curate the story you want to tell. We have months of documentation showing a pattern of isolation, manipulation, and financial exploitation. Your own social media posts about expensive dinners and new clothes will be reframed as evidence of your lavish spending using Rose's money." I thought about the modest celebrations I'd shared online, birthday dinners that Derek had insisted on, Gifts he'd given me that I'd assumed came from his trust fund, trips he'd planned that I'd believed were romantic gestures. All of it would now be recontextualized as evidence of my greed and manipulation. "And Derek's affair?" I asked. "How does that fit into your public narrative?" "What affair?" Cordelia asked innocently. "Derek has been maintaining a close friendship with Victoria throughout your marriage, but there's nothing inappropriate about socializing with family friends. If anything, it shows what a patient, loyal husband he's been despite your disappointments as a wife." The gaslighting was so complete, so systematic, that I almost admired its thoroughness. They'd crafted a story where Derek was the long-suffering husband, Vivienne was the protective mother, trying to save the family from a predator, and Cordelia was the innocent daughter trying to build something beautiful with stolen resources. "The divorce settlement will be quite generous under the circumstances," Vivienne continued, pulling out yet another set of documents. $25,000 and health insurance for 6 months. More than enough to help you relocate and start fresh somewhere, more appropriate to your background. I scanned the papers, noting clauses that would prevent me from ever discussing the marriage publicly, require me to change my last name back to Rodriguez, and forbid me from returning to New York for 5 years. It was exile disguised as generosity, designed to ensure I could never resurface to challenge their version of events. "And if I refuse this settlement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you'll be defending yourself against criminal charges with a public defender while living in a jail cell," Cordelia replied cheerfully. "Your choice, really. Exile or imprisonment. We're flexible about the details as long as the outcome is the same." I set the papers down on the dining table, next to the inheritance transfer documents I'd signed what felt like hours ago. The Christmas tree lights continued their cheerful twinkling, casting colorful shadows across what had become the scene of my complete destruction. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "I keep thinking about something Grandmama Rose used to say about her early years in New York. She told me that the worst mistakes people made when dealing with her was assuming she was helpless just because she looked vulnerable." Both women exchanged glances, clearly wondering where this was going. "She said the key to surviving in a world that wanted to destroy you was to let your enemies reveal all their weapons before you showed them yours." I picked up my purse and checked the time on my phone. "She also said that the most satisfying victories came when your opponents defeated themselves through their own arrogance." "That's very philosophical, Natalia," Vivienne said with patronizing patience. "But philosophy doesn't change the reality of your situation. You have no resources, no allies, no legal standing, and no credibility. We control the narrative, the evidence, and the outcome." I smiled for the first time all evening, and something in my expression made Cordelia stop mid-sip of her champagne. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "You do control everything. The question is, do you control the right things?" Before either woman could respond, I walked to the front door, pausing only to look back at them one final time. They sat frozen at the dining table, surrounded by their carefully organized documents and evidence, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, suddenly uncertain about something they couldn't quite identify. "Merry Christmas, ladies," I said softly. "I hope you enjoy the holiday, because it's going to be your last peaceful one for quite some time." I stepped out into the cold December night, pulling my coat tight against the wind that whipped off the Hudson River. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispers as Vivienne and Cordelia tried to decipher what had just happened, but I didn't look back. Instead, I walked to my car with measured steps, every movement deliberate and calm. Once inside, I sat in the darkness for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a small device that had been recording everything for the past 3 hours, a gift from Grandmama Rose that they'd never thought to look for. I also pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been waiting months to call. The number belonged to someone who'd been very patient, very thorough, and very interested in the Ashford family's business practices. Tomorrow, Vivienne and Cordelia would wake up expecting to read about my arrest in the morning news. Instead, they were going to discover that some games have rules they never knew existed, and some opponents fight battles on fields they never saw coming. As I started the engine and pulled away from the brownstone, I caught a glimpse of them in the window, still trying to figure out why their perfect victory felt so much like the beginning of their own destruction. I drove through the empty Christmas Eve streets of Manhattan, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The city looked peaceful under its blanket of fresh snow, but I knew that by morning, several lives would be forever changed. I pulled into the parking garage of a nondescript office building in Midtown and took the elevator to the 15th floor, where a single office remained lit despite the late hour. The nameplate on the door read, Harrison & Associates Financial Investigations. But what most people didn't know was that the firm specialized in forensic accounting for federal agencies. And what Vivienne and Cordelia definitely didn't know was that I'd been working with them for the past 8 months. Natalia, said a familiar voice as I entered the office. Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division rose from behind the desk, her expression serious but satisfied. I take it the meeting went according to plan? I set the recording device on her desk and sank into the chair across from her, finally allowing myself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for hours. Better than we hoped, they confessed to everything: the conspiracy, the manufactured evidence, the bribery, even Derek's affair and the fake marriage setup. 3 hours of detailed admissions. Agent Chen plugged the device into her computer and began reviewing the audio files, her trained ear picking up nuances that civilian courts would need expert testimony to understand. This is extraordinary, Natalia. We've been investigating the Ashford family's financial irregularities for 2 years, but we never had enough evidence to prove criminal intent. This changes everything. The story of how I'd ended up in this office began 6 months after Grandmama Rose's death, when I'd finally worked up the courage to go through her personal papers. Hidden in her bedroom safe, alongside family photographs and immigration documents, I'd found a manila envelope with my name written in her careful handwriting. Inside was a letter that had shattered my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my late grandmother's life. Rose Isabella Rodriguez hadn't just been a bookkeeper who'd married into New York society. She'd been an undercover financial analyst for the FBI, tracking money laundering operations through legitimate businesses from the 1960s through the 1980s. Your grandfather Thomas never knew, she'd written in the letter. I loved him completely, but my first loyalty was always to the country that gave me opportunities I never could have imagined in Puerto Rico. When I retired from the bureau, I thought I was done with that life forever. But the Ashford family's business practices, mi amor, they reminded me why I became an investigator in the first place. The letter went on to detail decades of suspicious financial activity that Rose had observed and documented during her marriage to Thomas. Shell companies that existed only on paper, real estate transactions with no legitimate buyers, charitable donations that seemed to disappear into offshore accounts, all carefully recorded in a series of notebooks that she'd hidden throughout the house. I knew they would come for you eventually, the letter continued. Vivienne never accepted me, and she will never accept you. But I also knew you had the intelligence and the courage to use what I'm giving you. The notebooks are hidden behind the false panel in the basement storage room. Agent Chen's contact information is with them. She was my handler during my final years of service, and she's been waiting for the right moment to bring down this family's criminal enterprise. I'd stared at that letter for hours, trying to reconcile the gentle grandmother who'd taught me to make pastellis with the federal agent, who'd spent decades infiltrating high society to expose financial crimes. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Her sharp questions about the family's business dealings, her careful observations about their spending patterns, her insistence on teaching me to follow the money during our conversations about current events. Agent Chen had been surprisingly unsurprised when I'd called the number from the letter. Rose told me about you years ago, she'd said during our first meeting. She was very proud of your analytical mind and your ability to remain calm under pressure. She also predicted that the family would eventually overplay their hand in trying to get rid of you. What followed were months of careful preparation and evidence gathering. Agent Chen taught me how to document financial irregularities, how to record conversations legally, and most importantly, how to let suspects incriminate themselves through their own arrogance. The plan had always been to wait until they made their move against me, then use their actions as evidence of a broader pattern of criminal behavior. The inheritance was never really about the money, I explained to Agent Chen as she continued reviewing the recordings. Rose knew they'd try to steal it, and she wanted them to confess to conspiracy and fraud in the process. The will was designed to be irresistible bait. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Rose was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Even in retirement, she was still thinking like an investigator. She pulled up a series of financial records on her computer screen. While you were gathering their confessions tonight, my team was executing search warrants on their business premises and personal accounts. What we found is staggering. The screen filled with evidence of a financial empire built on systematic fraud, fake construction projects that existed only to launder money, charitable foundations that funneled donations to personal accounts, real estate deals with inflated prices designed to hide the source of illegal funds. Vivienne's interior design business was particularly creative, billing clients millions for custom artwork that turned out to be money transfers to offshore accounts. Cordelia's art gallery venture was going to be their next major laundering operation, Agent Chen continued, scrolling through seized documents. The plan was to purchase artwork with dirty money, then sell it to legitimate collectors at inflated prices, effectively cleaning millions of dollars in illegal funds through the art market. I thought about Cordelia's excitement over the Basquiat painting, her casual mention of negotiating down the price with her connections. What I'd interpreted as spoiled rich girl behavior was actually sophisticated money laundering disguised as cultural patronage. "And Derek?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Fully complicit," Agent Chen confirmed. "His trust fund has been the primary vehicle for moving money between legitimate and illegitimate accounts for the past 5 years. The affair with Victoria Pemberton wasn't just personal. Her family's shipping business has been facilitating international money transfers for organized crime syndicates." The scope of the criminal enterprise was breathtaking. What I'd experienced as personal cruelty and family drama was actually the surface layer of a multi-generational criminal organization that had been operating under the cover of New York high society for decades. "So what happens now?" I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that was about to unfold. Agent Chen's smile was the same expression I imagined Rose had worn during her most successful investigations. "Now we spring the trap your grandmother spent 20 years setting. By tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the city will be running a very different story than the one Vivienne and Cordelia are expecting." She handed me a thick folder containing arrest warrants, asset seizure orders, and federal indictments that had been prepared months in advance, waiting only for the evidence we'd gathered tonight. "The beautiful thing about financial crimes," Agent Chen continued, "is that the evidence trail never lies. Bank records, transaction histories, recorded confessions, it all creates a picture that no expensive lawyer can argue away." I opened the folder and saw my own name listed not as a defendant, but as a federal witness under protection. Vivienne's threats about criminal prosecution had been based on manufactured evidence that would crumble the moment real investigators examined it. Meanwhile, the evidence against them was documented, verified, and backed by decades of Rose's careful observations. "There's one more thing," Agent Chen said, handing me a sealed envelope. "Rose left this for you to open after tonight's operation was complete." Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in Rose's handwriting. "Mi querida nieta, by the time you read this, you'll understand that everything I taught you about surviving in a hostile world was preparation for this moment. You are stronger than they ever imagined, and you carry forward not just my love but my legacy of fighting for justice. The inheritance was never about money. It was about giving you the tools to protect yourself and others from people who believe their wealth places them above the law. I am so proud of the woman you've become. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse, next to the recording device that had just ended the Ashford family's criminal reign. Outside the office windows, Christmas morning was beginning to dawn over New York City, and I knew that this would be a holiday no one involved would ever forget. Christmas morning arrived with crystalline clarity, both literally and figuratively. I stood at the window of Agent Chen's office, watching the sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered streets below, while behind me the full scope of our counter-operation unfolded with military precision. Phase 1 is already in motion, Agent Chen announced, hanging up her secure phone line. Federal marshals are positioned outside all primary residences. Asset seizure teams are standing by at 17 different locations, and our media liaison has the real story ready to break the moment we give the signal. I turned from the window to see a transformed office. What had looked like a simple private investigation firm now revealed itself as a full federal command center. Multiple agents worked at computer terminals, coordinating with field teams, while large monitors displayed real-time surveillance footage of the Ashford properties. The timing is crucial, Agent Chen continued, spreading a detailed operational timeline across her desk. Vivienne and Cordelia will wake up expecting to see news reports about your arrest. Instead, they'll discover that their entire world is collapsing simultaneously. We need to move fast enough that they can't destroy evidence or flee the country. Over the past months, while I'd been playing the role of Derek's docile wife, Agent Chen's team had been constructing an investigation that would have made Grandmama Rose proud. Every piece of evidence had been verified through multiple sources, every financial transaction traced through legitimate banking channels, every criminal connection documented with surveillance footage and recorded communications. Your grandmother's notebooks were extraordinary, Agent Chen said, pulling out copies of Rose's careful handwriting. 20 years of observations about suspicious meetings, unexplained wealth, contradictory business records. She documented patterns that would have taken us years to discover on our own. I picked up one of the notebooks, recognizing Rose's careful script as she detailed a charity auction from 1987 where artwork was purchased for far above market value by buyers who seemed to have no interest in actually taking possession of their purchases. At the time, it had seemed like wealthy people behaving strangely. Now, with the benefit of federal financial analysis, it was clearly an early money laundering operation. The genius of her approach, I observed, was that she never recorded anything that would seem suspicious to a casual observer. These just looked like the observations of a curious woman attending social events with her husband. Exactly. And because she was married to Thomas, she had access to family financial records that would have been impossible for federal agents to obtain legally. She created a 20-year undercover operation with no official authorization, no backup, and no recognition. Just a personal commitment to exposing financial crimes. Agent Chen's computer chimed with an incoming message, and her expression grew satisfied as she read the contents. The warrant team just finished searching Vivienne's interior design office. They found servers containing financial records going back 15 years, including detailed communications with money laundering contacts in the Cayman Islands. The scope of Vivienne's operation was staggering. Her interior design business had been a front for one of the most sophisticated money laundering enterprises the FBI had ever encountered. Wealthy clients would pay millions for custom design services that consisted entirely of moving dirty money through offshore accounts, then receiving cleaned funds back through perfectly legitimate-looking invoices for artwork, furniture, and renovations that existed only on paper. The art gallery plan was their biggest mistake, Agent Chen continued, pulling up architectural plans and financial projections that had been seized from Cordelia's apartment. They were planning to go international, partnering with galleries in London, Paris, and Dubai to move money for Eastern European crime syndicates. If we hadn't stopped them now, they would have become untouchable within another year. I studied the elaborate diagrams showing how artwork would be purchased with dirty money in one country, shipped to galleries in other countries, then sold to legitimate collectors at inflated prices. The difference between the actual value and the sale price would be split between the Ashfords and their criminal partners, effectively washing millions of dollars while creating the appearance of legitimate art dealing. And Derek knew all of this? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Derek was being groomed to take over the operation, Agent Chen confirmed, showing me surveillance photos of him meeting with known money laundering facilitators. His trust fund wasn't just personal wealth, it was the testing ground for new laundering techniques. Every expensive purchase he made for you was actually a dry run for moving illegal funds through retail transactions. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Every romantic gesture, every expensive dinner, every piece of jewelry Derek had given me had been part of a criminal enterprise. He hadn't been trying to make me happy. He'd been practicing money laundering techniques on someone he considered expendable. The marriage was part of his cover, Agent Chen continued gently. A young lawyer with a working-class wife looks like someone building a legitimate life, not someone preparing to take over a multi-million-dollar criminal operation. You were never meant to be his real partner. You were his alibi. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. Hope you're feeling better this morning. Mom said you were tired after dinner last night. Love you. The casual lies felt different now that I understood their true context. He wasn't trying to maintain our relationship. He was maintaining his cover story. What about Victoria Pemberton? I asked, needing to understand the full scope of their deception. Agent Chen pulled up financial records, showing a web of connections between the Pemberton shipping business and international criminal organizations. The Pembertons have been facilitating illegal money transfers for organized crime syndicates for over a decade. Victoria's relationship with Derek wasn't just personal, it was a business merger disguised as a romance. The sophistication of the operation was breathtaking. 3 families working together to create a financial crime network that spanned multiple continents, all hidden behind the facade of New York high society respectability. Charity auctions, art galleries, interior design businesses, shipping companies, legitimate enterprises corrupted into vehicles for criminal activity. Your role in exposing this can't be overstated, Agent Chen said, returning to the operational timeline. Without the recorded confessions from last night, we would have had circumstantial evidence of financial irregularities, but proving criminal intent would have been nearly impossible. Rich people can always claim their unusual financial activities are just eccentric wealth management. I thought about Vivienne's arrogant explanations of their plans, Cordelia's casual descriptions of their money laundering schemes, Derek's documented affair serving as evidence of the marriage fraud. In their certainty that I was powerless, they'd provided detailed confessions to federal crimes that would have taken years to prove in court. The beauty of their arrogance, I realized, was that they never considered the possibility that their victim might be fighting back. They were so convinced of their own superiority that they explained their entire criminal operation to someone they assumed would be too frightened and powerless to use the information. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Rose trained you well. The best federal agents understand that the most dangerous criminals are often defeated by their own hubris. Give them enough rope, and they'll hang themselves with detailed confessions. My secure phone rang with a call from the asset seizure team. All accounts frozen, the voice reported. 17 properties secured. No flight attempts detected. Subjects appeared to be unaware of the operation. Excellent, Agent Chen replied. Initiate Phase 2. She turned to me with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal vindication. It's time to let them know that their perfect crime just became their perfect downfall. Are you ready to watch the Ashford criminal empire collapse? I thought about Grandmama Rose, spending decades in enemy territory, patiently documenting crimes while maintaining the facade of a devoted wife and grandmother. I thought about the inheritance that had never been about money, but about justice. I thought about all the future victims who would be protected, because we'd stopped this operation before it expanded internationally. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it completely. Outside the window, Christmas morning in New York City looked peaceful and innocent. But I knew that within the next few hours, the carefully constructed world of the Ashford family would begin crumbling in ways they never could have imagined. The student had finally graduated from the teacher's 20-year course in justice. At precisely 8 a.m. on Christmas morning, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The number belonged to someone I'd never expected to hear from. Richard Blackstone, president of First National Bank of New York, the institution that held not only the Ashford family's primary accounts, but also the financial infrastructure for their entire criminal operation. "Mrs. Rodriguez Ashford," came the distinguished voice I'd only heard in news interviews. "I hope you'll forgive the early call on Christmas morning, but I have some rather urgent news that cannot wait. I believe you should come to my office immediately." Agent Chen looked up from her computer terminal, eyebrows raised. Richard Blackstone didn't make personal calls on holidays unless national security was involved. "What's this about?" she asked quietly. "I'm not sure," I admitted, though something in Blackstone's tone suggested this wasn't the disaster call Vivienne and Cordelia would soon be receiving. "He wants to meet in person." Agent Chen made a quick decision. "I'm coming with you. If Blackstone is involved, this operation just became significantly more complex." The ride to First National's headquarters took us through empty Christmas morning streets, past families heading to church, and children playing with new toys in Central Park. The contrast between their peaceful holiday and the federal investigation unfolding around us felt surreal. But I was beginning to understand that justice rarely waited for convenient timing. Richard Blackstone met us personally at the bank's private entrance, his silver hair impeccably styled despite the early hour and holiday timing. At 68, he remained one of the most powerful financial figures in New York, a man whose decisions affected international markets and whose word could make or break careers. "Agent Chen," he said, recognizing her immediately, "I was hoping you'd accompany Mrs. Rodriguez Ashford. What I have to share concerns both the federal investigation and her personal situation." He led us to his private office on the 42nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. But what captured my attention wasn't the scenery. It was the conference table covered with documents, computer printouts, and what appeared to be decades of financial records. "For the past 18 months, Blackstone began without preamble, I've been conducting my own investigation into the Ashford family's banking activities. What started as routine compliance monitoring became something far more significant when I discovered patterns that suggested systematic money laundering through our institution." Agent Chen leaned forward intently. "You've been investigating them independently?" "Not independently, in coordination with federal oversight, but through different channels. The banking industry has been under intense pressure to identify and report suspicious financial activities. The Ashford accounts triggered multiple automated alerts over the past 2 years, and when I began examining them personally, I discovered something extraordinary." Blackstone pulled out a thick folder marked with security classifications I hadn't seen since my brief stint working in federal administrative support before becoming a healthcare worker. "Your grandmother, Mrs. Rodriguez Ashford, was not just a former federal investigator, she was also one of our most trusted financial intelligence assets." The revelation hit me like lightning. What does that mean exactly? It means that for the past 15 years of her life, Rose Rodriguez was working directly with federal banking authorities to monitor and document money laundering activities conducted through legitimate financial institutions. Her position as Thomas Ashford's widow gave her unique access to family financial information, which she systematically reported to a joint FBI Treasury task force. Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly. "I wasn't aware of any joint task force involvement in her activities." "Because her work was classified at the highest levels," Blackstone continued. "Money laundering through major banking institutions poses national security risks when it involves international criminal organizations. Rose's intelligence was used to track and interrupt funding for everything from drug cartels to terrorist organizations. He opened another folder, revealing bank records that showed the true scope of the Ashford criminal enterprise. Over the past decade, the family has laundered an estimated $47 million through our institution alone. But they were also using smaller banks, investment firms, and cryptocurrency exchanges to move money internationally. I stared at the numbers, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what Rose had been fighting against. She knew all of this? She helped us document all of this, Blackstone corrected. Every suspicious transaction, every unusual money transfer, every connection to known criminal organizations, Rose provided the intelligence that allowed us to build a comprehensive picture of their operations without alerting them to our investigation. Agent Chen was studying the financial records with professional fascination. This explains how they were able to operate for so long without detection. They had access to inside information about banking security protocols. Exactly. Derek's position as attorney specializing in financial law gave him advanced knowledge of new anti-money laundering regulations. Vivienne's connections in high society provided cover for unusual financial activities, and Cordelia's emerging role in the art world was going to give them access to international markets where oversight is historically weak. Blackstone moved to his computer and pulled up real-time account monitoring displays. But here's what they don't know. Every transaction they've made for the past 2 years has been monitored and recorded by federal authorities. Every dollar they've moved, every account they've accessed, every financial decision they've made has been documented as evidence. The screens showed activity from just hours earlier, attempts to transfer large sums of money to offshore accounts, sudden liquidation of investment portfolios, and frantic communications with financial institutions in countries with bank secrecy laws. They're already trying to move money, Agent Chen observed grimly. They've been trying since 3 a.m., Blackstone confirmed. But every transfer has been automatically flagged and frozen. They don't realize it yet, but their access to all financial resources was terminated the moment you finished recording their confessions last night. I felt a chill of satisfaction thinking about Vivienne and Cordelia waking up to discover that their carefully planned escape routes had been blocked before they even knew they needed them. There's more, Blackstone continued, pulling out what appeared to be legal documents. Rose left specific instructions about the inheritance, instructions that go far beyond what was revealed in the will reading. She wanted you to have not just her personal wealth but also the power to ensure that justice was served. He handed me a document that made my hands tremble as I read it. Rose had not only left me her $4.2 million estate, she had also arranged for me to receive federal compensation for serving as an intelligence asset, survivor benefits from her years of federal service, and most significantly, legal authority to act as executor of a federal asset forfeiture case. What does that mean in practical terms? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be life-changing. It means that when the Ashford criminal assets are seized by federal authorities, which will happen within the next few hours, you will have legal standing to ensure those assets are distributed according to federal guidelines for victim compensation and law enforcement support, Agent Chen explained, her voice filled with admiration for Rose's strategic planning. Blackstone nodded approvingly. Your grandmother spent 15 years not just gathering evidence against the Ashfords, but also building a legal framework that would ensure their victims received justice and their criminal assets were permanently removed from circulation. The scope of Rose's planning was breathtaking. She hadn't just exposed a criminal organization, she'd created a comprehensive system for ensuring that their crimes would result in meaningful consequences and that their victims would receive appropriate compensation. The inheritance they tried to steal last night, I realized, was never just about money. It was about giving me the legal authority to oversee the destruction of their criminal empire. And the resources to ensure you could survive the process, Blackstone added. Rose knew they would try to destroy you personally, professionally, and financially. She gave you not just the tools to defend yourself, but the power to ensure they faced complete consequences for their crimes. Agent Chen's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message. After reading it, she looked up with grim satisfaction. Federal marshals are in position at all locations. Asset seizure teams are ready. Media partners have the story prepared for immediate release. Blackstone stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city that was about to witness one of the largest financial crime takedowns in New York history. "Mrs. Rodriguez Ashford," he said formally, "are you ready to execute the final phase of your grandmother's 20-year investigation?" I thought about Rose spending decades in enemy territory, patiently building not just a case against criminals but a comprehensive plan for justice. I thought about the inheritance that had never been about personal wealth, but about creating the tools necessary to protect future victims. "I'm ready," I said, and this time I understood exactly what that meant. Outside the windows of First National Bank, Christmas morning in New York was about to become much more interesting. At 9:15 a.m. on Christmas morning, while federal agents positioned themselves around 17 different locations throughout New York City, I sat in Richard Blackstone's office, making the most important phone call of my life. The number belonged to Derek, and for the first time in our 3-year marriage, I was calling him with complete clarity about who he really was and what I was about to do. "Natalia?" Derek's voice carried a mixture of surprise and what sounded like genuine concern. "I didn't expect to hear from you this early. How are you feeling after last night? Mom said you seemed overwhelmed by the family discussion." The casual lies rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that I almost admired his skill. "I'm feeling much clearer about everything now," I replied truthfully. "In fact, I wanted to thank you for helping me understand where I really stand in this family." Agent Chen and Richard Blackstone listened intently as I navigated the conversation, following the script we'd rehearsed to ensure Derek would be exactly where we needed him when the arrests began. "I've been thinking about what your mother said about family loyalty," I continued, keeping my voice steady despite the anger still burning in my chest. "She's right. I should be supporting Cordelia's dreams. Maybe we could meet for brunch this morning to discuss how I can be more helpful to the family business." Derek's relief was palpable through the phone. "That's wonderful, Natalia. I knew you'd come around once you had time to process everything. Mom and Cordelia are actually at the Plaza Hotel this morning, celebrating the gallery funding. They'd love to see you there." Perfect. The Plaza Hotel's security cameras would document every moment of what was about to unfold, and the public location would prevent any attempts to destroy evidence or flee once they realized what was happening. "I'll be there in an hour," I promised. "And Derek, thank you for being so patient with me. I know this hasn't been easy for you, pretending our marriage was real for so long." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats before Derek's carefully modulated voice returned. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Natalia. Our marriage is very real to me." "Of course it is," I agreed pleasantly. "Just like your relationship with Victoria Pemberton is very real too. I understand now. You've been juggling so many relationships and responsibilities. It must be exhausting maintaining all those different versions of yourself." Another pause, longer this time, filled with the sound of Derek trying to calculate whether I was threatening him or simply acknowledging the situation. "Natalia, if you're upset about Victoria—" "I'm not upset," I interrupted gently. "I'm grateful. She's clearly much better suited to be part of your family's business ventures. I could never have provided the kind of international connections she brings to your operations." The conversation ended with Derek promising to see me at the plaza, his voice carrying undertones of confusion and wariness that told me he was beginning to suspect that something had fundamentally changed overnight. But by the time he figured out what that something was, it would be far too late. Agent Chen checked her watch and nodded to Blackstone. "All federal teams report ready status. Media partners are standing by. Asset seizure operations will commence simultaneously at 10:30 a.m. I looked out the windows of Blackstone's office at the city spread below us, thinking about all the people going about their normal Christmas morning routines, unaware that one of the largest financial crime takedowns in New York history was about to unfold around them. Families opening presents, couples enjoying lazy holiday mornings, children playing with new toys, all of them living in a world where people like the Ashfords operated with impunity, stealing and destroying lives while hiding behind charitable donations and society galas. "There's something else you should know," Blackstone said, pulling out a final folder that he'd kept separate from all the others. "Your grandmother's intelligence work wasn't limited to the Ashford family. Over the past 15 years, her information has been instrumental in disrupting 14 separate money laundering operations, resulting in the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets." The folder contained newspaper clippings, federal press releases, and court documents showing cases I'd read about in the news without ever realizing Rose's connection to them. Art dealers convicted of selling forged paintings to hide drug money. Charity organizations exposed for funneling donations to terrorist groups. Real estate developers imprisoned for using construction projects to launder proceeds from human trafficking operations. She was a one-woman intelligence operation, I realized, staring at the documentation of Rose's secret war against financial crime. All those society events she attended, all those charity auctions and gallery openings. She was gathering evidence the entire time. "And she was training you to carry on that work," Agent Chen added, reviewing the operational timeline on her tablet. "The inheritance was never meant to be your reward for enduring the Ashford family's cruelty. It was meant to be your operating budget for continuing her mission." The weight of that responsibility settled over me like a mantle. Rose hadn't just been saving me from one criminal family. She'd been preparing me to spend my life fighting against all the families like them, all the wealthy criminals who used their social status and financial resources to commit crimes with impunity. My secure phone buzzed with incoming messages from the federal surveillance teams positioned around the city. Subject Vivienne entering Plaza Hotel with subject Cordelia. Subject Derek departing Hampton's residence, ETA Plaza Hotel 45 minutes. Subject Victoria Pemberton en route to JFK Airport, intercepted by federal marshals. Agent Chen smiled grimly. "Victoria won't be making any emergency trips to non-extradition countries today. Her passport was flagged and her assets frozen an hour ago." Through the secure communication system, I could hear the calm, professional voices of federal agents coordinating the largest financial crime operation many of them had ever been part of. Asset seizure teams confirming positions at banks, law offices, art galleries, and private residences. Media liaison officers preparing to release the story that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Federal prosecutors reviewing indictments that had been months in preparation. "Are you ready for this?" Blackstone asked, and I realized he wasn't just asking about the morning's operations. He was asking whether I was prepared for the life that would follow, the media attention, the legal proceedings, the responsibility of overseeing the distribution of seized criminal assets, and the ongoing work of continuing Rose's intelligence mission. I thought about the quiet kindergarten teacher I'd been just 24 hours earlier, planning a peaceful Christmas morning with a husband I'd believed loved me, and in-laws I'd hoped would eventually accept me. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. Someone naive enough to believe that good intentions and hard work would be enough to earn a place in a world that had never intended to include her. "I'm ready," I said, and this time I understood exactly what I was committing to. Not just revenge against the people who'd tried to destroy me, but a lifetime of fighting against all the people like them. Rose's war against financial crime wouldn't end with the Ashford family's destruction. It would continue with me carrying forward her mission of protecting future victims from similar predators. Agent Chen's tablet chimed with a final message from the field teams. "All units in position. Operation Inheritance commences in 15 minutes." I gathered my purse and coat, checking to ensure I had everything I needed for what would likely be the most important morning of my life. The recording device from last night's confession session. Rose's final letter explaining my true inheritance. Federal identification documents establishing my authority in the asset forfeiture case. And most importantly, the calm confidence that came from knowing I was finally fighting on the right side of a war that had been going on for decades. "Let's go serve some justice," I said, walking toward the door that would take me from the safety of Blackstone's office into the controlled chaos of a federal operation designed to bring down one of New York's most sophisticated criminal enterprises. Outside Christmas morning in Manhattan was about to become significantly more eventful for several very surprised families. At exactly 10:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, as I walked through the marble lobby of the Plaza Hotel toward the restaurant where Vivienne and Cordelia were celebrating their anticipated victory, my secure phone vibrated with a single-word message from Agent Chen: execute. Across New York City, 17 simultaneous operations began with the precision of a Swiss watch. Federal marshals approached the Ashford family brownstone in the Upper East Side. Asset seizure teams entered Vivienne's interior design offices in Midtown. FBI agents presented warrants at Cordelia's Soho apartment. And at JFK Airport, Victoria Pemberton was led away in handcuffs just as she was attempting to board a private jet to Switzerland. But I was focused on the scene unfolding before me in the Plaza's Oak Room, where Vivienne and Cordelia sat at a corner table surrounded by champagne bottles, legal documents, and what appeared to be architectural plans for the art gallery that would never be built. They looked like queens surveying their newly conquered territory, completely unaware that their kingdom was crumbling around them at that very moment. "Natalia!" Cordelia called out with theatrical enthusiasm as she spotted me approaching their table. "I'm so glad you decided to join us for our victory celebration. Mother was just saying how proud she is that you finally understand your place in the family hierarchy." Vivienne's smile was pure predatory satisfaction as she gestured to an empty chair they'd clearly been expecting me to occupy. "Sit down, dear. We have so much to discuss about your new role in our family's future. Much more manageable expectations, of course, but still meaningful in its own small way." I remained standing, checking my watch with deliberate precision. "Actually, I think you'll find that your family's future is about to become much more complicated than you anticipated." Both women exchanged glances, clearly puzzled by my tone but not yet alarmed. After all, from their perspective, I was still the defeated kindergarten teacher who'd signed away her inheritance less than 12 hours earlier. "What do you mean by that?" Vivienne asked, her voice carrying just a hint of the wariness that came from decades of criminal activity. But it was too little, too late. At that moment, my phone rang with a call from Agent Chen. I answered it on speaker, knowing that every word would be recorded and documented for the federal case files. "Mrs. Rodriguez Ashford," Agent Chen's voice filled the sudden silence at our table. "This is Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling to inform you that federal warrants have been executed for the arrests of Vivienne Ashford, Cordelia Ashford Wellington, Derek Ashford, and 17 associates on charges including money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and criminal enterprise operations." The color drained from Vivienne's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Cordelia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor and drawing the attention of other hotel guests. "I don't understand," Vivienne whispered, her voice no longer carrying any trace of the aristocratic authority she'd wielded so confidently the night before. "Let me explain," I said, pulling out the chair they'd offered me and sitting down with calm deliberation. "For the past 18 months, I've been working as a federal intelligence asset, just like my grandmother Rose did for the 15 years before her death. Every conversation we've had, every family meeting I've attended, every financial transaction I've witnessed has been documented and reported to federal authorities." Cordelia's face had gone from pale to green and she was staring at me like I'd suddenly sprouted horns. "That's impossible. You're just a healthcare worker. You don't have the intelligence or resources to systematically document a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation," I interrupted gently. "To record detailed confessions of federal crimes? to coordinate with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and banking authorities to build an ironclad case against your family's criminal enterprise? I pulled out my phone and played a brief section of the previous night's recording, their own voices filling the restaurant space as they described their money laundering schemes, their bribery of officials, and their plans to destroy my life through manufactured evidence. You see, I continued as other hotel guests began to notice the commotion at our table, Rose taught me that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who let their enemies think they've already won. You were so convinced of your own superiority, so certain that I was powerless, that you explained your entire criminal operation in exquisite detail. Vivienne was frantically dialing numbers on her phone, but I could tell from her increasingly desperate expressions that none of her calls were being answered. "The accounts," she muttered. "Why aren't any of the accounts accessible?" "Because they were frozen at 6 a.m. this morning," I explained helpfully. "Along with all your real estate holdings, business assets, investment portfolios, and offshore accounts. Even the money you thought you'd hidden in cryptocurrency exchanges has been seized." Through the restaurant's windows, I could see news vans beginning to arrive outside the hotel. The media story that Agent Chen's team had prepared was already breaking across every major news outlet in the city. Cordelia was staring at her phone in horror as push notifications flooded her screen. Federal investigation exposes multi-million-dollar money laundering ring. Prominent New York family arrested in financial crimes sweep. Art gallery money laundering scheme uncovered by FBI. "How?" Vivienne asked, her voice barely audible. "How did you know? How did you have access to federal resources? How did you coordinate all of this?" I smiled, thinking of Rose sitting in this very restaurant years ago, probably documenting similar conversations with other criminals who'd underestimated her intelligence and determination. "Because I'm Isabella Rodriguez's granddaughter," I said simply. "And she spent 20 years teaching me that justice sometimes requires patience, strategic thinking, and the willingness to let your enemies destroy themselves through their own arrogance." At that moment, Derek appeared in the restaurant doorway, clearly having received some kind of urgent communication during his drive from the Hamptons. His face was flushed with panic, and he was scanning the room desperately until his eyes landed on our table. "Mom," he called out, hurrying toward us. "Something's wrong. Victoria's been arrested at the airport, and there are federal agents at the house. They're saying something about money laundering and—" He stopped abruptly as he noticed the expressions on his mother's and sister's faces, then slowly turned to look at me with dawning comprehension. "Hello, Derek," I said pleasantly. "I was just explaining to your family how Rose's 20-year investigation into their criminal activities has finally reached its conclusion." Derek sank into the remaining chair at our table, his face cycling through expressions of shock, betrayal, and finally, grudging admiration. "You knew," he said quietly. "All this time you knew exactly what we were doing." "I knew what you were doing to me," I corrected, "but I had no idea about the international money laundering, the terrorist funding connections, or the scale of your family's criminal enterprise, until Rose's notebooks revealed the full scope of your operations." Vivienne was staring at me with something approaching awe. "Rose, that sweet old Puerto Rican woman who baked cookies and told stories about the old neighborhood. She was a federal agent. She was a patriot who understood that wealthy criminals pose threats to national security," I replied. "And she spent decades gathering evidence that will not only put your family in federal prison, but will also disrupt criminal networks across 3 continents." Through the restaurant windows, I could see federal marshals approaching the hotel entrance. Our breakfast meeting was about to become significantly more official. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up and adjusting my coat. "It's been educational, but I think it's time for me to step back and let federal law enforcement handle the next phase of this operation." As I walked away from the table, leaving the 3 of them staring after me in stunned silence, I heard Cordelia's voice, small and broken. "But the art gallery, the money, the inheritance, it was all supposed to be ours." I paused at the restaurant entrance and looked back one final time at the family that had spent 3 years trying to convince me I didn't belong in their world. "It was never yours," I said simply. "It was evidence." Outside the Plaza Hotel, Agent Chen was waiting, with a satisfied smile, and federal marshals who were about to make Christmas morning very memorable for several people who'd forgotten that justice doesn't take holidays. 6 months later, I stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, watching as the final chapter of the Ashford criminal empire came to its inevitable conclusion. The media circus that had surrounded the family's arrest on Christmas morning had evolved into a methodical presentation of evidence that left no doubt about the scope and sophistication of their crimes. Vivienne Ashford received 22 years in federal prison for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy charges. Her interior design business, which federal prosecutors proved had laundered over $63 million through fake invoices and phantom projects, was permanently dissolved. Every piece of artwork, every designer handbag, every symbol of the wealth she'd built through criminal activity was seized and sold at federal auction. She actually asked for leniency based on her age and social standing, Agent Chen told me as we watched the bailiffs lead Vivienne away in handcuffs. The judge reminded her that financial crimes don't become less serious when committed by wealthy defendants. Cordelia received 18 years, her sentence reduced slightly because prosecutors determined she'd been following her family's criminal blueprint rather than creating new schemes. Her planned art gallery became Evidence Exhibit A47, its business plan dissected by federal accountants who used it to map connections between American money laundering operations and European crime syndicates. The international art world is going to be much more carefully monitored because of this case, Richard Blackstone had explained during one of our regular briefings. Cordelia's gallery scheme was sophisticated enough that it could have laundered hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds if we hadn't stopped it. Derek's sentence was the most complicated because his cooperation with federal investigators had provided crucial evidence against larger criminal networks. 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of reduction based on his continued assistance in prosecuting other money laundering operations. His law license was permanently revoked, and every legal case he'd ever worked on was being reviewed for potential criminal connections. "I never loved you," he'd said during the one conversation we'd had since his arrest, his voice carrying a mixture of bitterness and grudging respect. "But I never expected you to be capable of this level of strategic planning. Rose trained you well." Victoria Pemberton received 12 years for her family's shipping company's role in facilitating international money transfers for organized crime. The Pemberton shipping business, which had operated for 4 generations, was dissolved, and its assets seized. Federal investigators discovered that their legitimate cargo operations had been used to transport everything from drug proceeds to weapons payments across international borders. "The ripple effects have been extraordinary," Agent Chen explained as we reviewed the final case statistics. "Your grandmother's intelligence work, combined with the evidence we gathered from the Christmas confession, has led to arrests in 7 countries. Over $400 million in criminal assets have been seized, and 14 separate criminal organizations have been disrupted. But the most satisfying moment came when I testified before a federal grand jury about the systematic elder abuse the family had planned to use against me. Dr. Patterson, the physician Vivienne had attempted to bribe into falsifying Rose's medical records, received 5 years for healthcare fraud and conspiracy charges. Rose Rodriguez was one of the sharpest, most cognitively intact patients I ever treated, Dr. Patterson admitted during his plea hearing. Mrs. Ashford offered me a department chair position and substantial donations to my research if I would testify that Mrs. Rodriguez showed signs of dementia and confusion. I agreed because I needed the funding for my research program. The false evidence they'd manufactured about my alleged elder abuse was systematically demolished by federal investigators who discovered the conspiracy extended to multiple healthcare providers, bank officials, and even journalists who'd been paid to plant negative stories about healthcare workers who inherited money from their patients. They weren't just trying to steal your inheritance, Agent Chen observed. They were creating a blueprint for wealthy families to discredit and destroy anyone who threatened their financial interests. Your case has led to federal legislation protecting healthcare workers and other vulnerable professionals from exactly this kind of systematic character assassination. The asset forfeiture process was equally thorough and satisfying. The Ashford family brownstone, worth over $8 million, was seized and converted into affordable housing for healthcare workers. Vivienne's art collection, valued at over $12 million, was donated to public museums with plaques acknowledging that the works were recovered from criminal proceeds through federal asset forfeiture. Cordelia's luxury apartment became a victim services center specializing in financial crimes recovery. Derek's trust fund, which federal investigators determined contained over $15 million in laundered money, was distributed to victims of the various criminal enterprises the family had facilitated over the years. The most important outcome, Richard Blackstone explained during the final asset distribution hearing, is that we've established legal precedents for how financial institutions should identify and respond to money laundering operations. Your grandmother's intelligence work has changed how we monitor wealthy clients' financial activities. My own life had transformed beyond recognition. The inheritance Rose had left me was returned in full, along with federal compensation for my work as an intelligence asset and survivor benefits from her years of federal service. But more importantly, I'd found my true calling continuing her mission of exposing financial crimes committed by wealthy criminals who believed their social status placed them above the law. You could retire comfortably and never work another day in your life, Agent Chen had pointed out when I'd announced my decision to join the FBI's Financial Crimes Division as a full-time special agent. Rose didn't spend 20 years fighting these people so I could retire to Florida, I'd replied. She trained me to carry on her work protecting future victims from families like the Ashfords. The kindergarten job I'd loved remained part of my life, but now it served as perfect cover for investigating suspicious financial activities in the communities where wealthy families sent their children to school. Amazing how much intelligence you could gather during parent-teacher conferences and school fundraising events when you knew what questions to ask. The irony, I reflected as Agent Chen and I left the courthouse after the final sentencing hearing, is that they were right about one thing. I never belonged in their world of old money and inherited privilege. No, Agent Chen agreed with a smile, you belonged in Rose's world of justice and accountability. Much more important work. As we walked through the crowds of reporters and photographers documenting the end of one of New York's most high-profile financial crime cases, I thought about Rose's final letter and her prediction that the inheritance would give me the tools to become the person I was always meant to be. She'd been right, as usual. The money the Ashfords had tried to steal hadn't just been my inheritance. It had been my transformation into someone who could spend her life ensuring that wealthy criminals faced consequences for their crimes, that their victims received justice, and that future victims would be protected by the legal precedents we'd established. The kindergarten teacher from Queens had become something the Ashford family had never imagined possible. Their worst nightmare, armed with federal authority and dedicated to continuing a 20-year mission of exposing the criminal enterprises that hid behind charity galas and society pages. Rose would have been proud. And somewhere in federal prison, Vivienne Ashford was probably still trying to figure out how the woman she'd dismissed as nobody from nowhere had orchestrated the complete destruction of everything she'd spent her life building. Justice, it turned out, had been worth the wait. 2 years after that Christmas Eve confrontation that changed everything, I stood in the newly renovated community center that had once been Vivienne Ashford's interior design office, watching 30 kindergartners from Brooklyn Heights perform their holiday play for an audience of families who represented the neighborhood's transformation. The building's conversion had been my idea, part of the federal asset forfeiture program that I now helped oversee as a senior investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Where Vivienne had once planned elaborate money laundering schemes disguised as luxury interior projects, children now attended after-school programs funded by the proceeds from seized criminal assets. The irony was perfect, and I knew Rose would have approved of how her 20-year investigation had created something beautiful from the ruins of criminal enterprise. Agent Rodriguez called Maria Santos, the center's director, using the professional name I'd chosen when I joined the FBI. The children are asking if you'll read them the Christmas story you promised. I'd kept my maiden name professionally, partly for security reasons related to ongoing financial crime investigations, but mostly because I wanted to honor the legacy Rose had left me. The hyphenated name Natalia Rodriguez Ashford belonged to a different woman. Someone who'd believed that love and hard work would be enough to earn acceptance in a world that never intended to include her. The story I'd prepared wasn't the traditional Christmas tale the children expected. Instead, I'd written a modern fable about a young woman who discovered that her greatest strength came not from trying to fit into places that didn't welcome her, but from using her intelligence and determination to protect others from people who use their wealth to hurt innocent families. Once upon a time, I began, sitting cross-legged on the colorful carpet surrounded by eager faces. There was a woman who thought she wanted to belong to a powerful family, but she discovered that real power comes from standing up for people who can't protect themselves. The children listened intently as I told them about courage that looks like patience, about wisdom that sounds like questions, and about how sometimes the most important victories happen when no one is watching except the people whose lives are changed forever. Through the center's windows, I could see the Brooklyn Heights brownstone that had once been Rose's home and was now affordable housing for healthcare workers, teachers, and social workers, the kinds of people who dedicate their lives to caring for others. 24 families lived there now, including 3 nurses who worked with elderly patients and 2 teachers who specialized in helping immigrant children learn English. My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Chen, who'd become both my mentor and closest friend over the past 2 years. New case briefing tomorrow morning. High society charity fraud targeting cancer research donations. Suspects include 2 federal judges' wives and a pharmaceutical company CEO. We'll need someone who understands how wealthy criminals operate. Interested? I smiled, typing back a quick response. Absolutely. These people never learn. The truth was, they did learn. They just learned the wrong lessons. Every few months, Agent Chen and I encountered another wealthy family or social circle that believed their money and connections placed them above federal law. They'd studied the Ashford case, but instead of understanding that financial crimes inevitably led to federal prosecution, they convinced themselves they were smarter, more careful, more deserving of their criminal success. Agent Rodriguez, interrupted Sophie, a 6-year-old with bright, curious eyes. In your story, does the woman ever see the bad family again? Sometimes, I replied honestly, but when she does, she's not afraid anymore. She knows exactly who she is and what she's capable of. The question brought back memories of the one encounter I'd had with Derek since his sentencing. He'd been transferred to a federal prison in Pennsylvania, and I'd visited him as part of my ongoing work documenting the psychological profiles of white-collar criminals for FBI training purposes. You destroyed my entire family, he'd said during our brief conversation, his voice carrying more admiration than anger. Mother still doesn't understand how someone like you could have orchestrated something so comprehensive. Someone like me? I'd asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Someone from outside our world. Someone without our advantages or connections. Someone we never would have considered a threat. Derek had studied me through the prison glass, shaking his head slowly. Rose must have been planning this for decades. Every Christmas dinner, every family gathering, every conversation about business, she was gathering intelligence the entire time. She was protecting people, I'd corrected. Your family spent years destroying lives for profit. Rose spent years documenting those crimes so the victims could eventually receive justice. And you? Derek had asked. What are you protecting now? The answer had been simple: everyone I could reach. As I finished the story and watched the children return to their families, I thought about the dozens of cases Agent Chen and I had worked together over the past 2 years. Money laundering operations disguised as art sales, charity fraud targeting medical research funding, real estate schemes that displaced low-income families to hide drug proceeds. Each case followed similar patterns: wealthy criminals assuming their social status provided immunity from consequences. My secure phone rang with a call from Richard Blackstone, who'd become not just an ally but a close friend as we'd worked together to reform banking oversight procedures for high-net-worth clients. Natalia, his voice carried the satisfaction that always accompanied successful operations. The charity fraud case we've been building just broke wide open. The pharmaceutical CEO tried to flee to Monaco this morning and was arrested by federal marshals at Teterboro Airport. We have recorded confessions, complete financial records, and enough evidence to prosecute the entire network. How much did they steal from cancer research? I asked, though I suspected the number would be staggering. $47 million over 8 years, all diverted from legitimate donations into personal accounts and luxury purchases. The federal prosecutors are calling it one of the most egregious charity fraud cases in New York history. I looked around the community center, thinking about how criminal proceeds could be transformed into something that actually helped people. Any ideas about how to use the seized assets? Actually, yes. There's a proposal to fund a research facility specializing in treatments for childhood cancers, staffed by the same researchers whose work was sabotaged by this fraud ring. Poetic justice, using stolen money to accelerate the very research they were trying to destroy. After ending the call, I walked through the center's hallways, looking at artwork created by children whose families represented the kinds of people Rose had spent her life protecting. Immigrant families working multiple jobs to build better lives. Single mothers pursuing nursing degrees while caring for elderly patients. Teachers who chose lower salaries because they believed education could change the world. These were the people wealthy criminals victimized when they stole from charities, laundered drug money through community banks, or manipulated healthcare systems for profit. They deserved federal agents who understood their struggles, who'd lived in their communities, who chose justice over personal advancement. My reflection was interrupted by Sophia, the same 6-year-old who'd asked about my story earlier. She approached shyly, holding a drawing she'd made during art time. "This is for you, Agent Rodriguez," she said, handing me a crayon drawing of a woman wearing a badge, surrounded by hearts and stars. At the bottom, in careful kindergarten handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for protecting people." I knelt down to Sophia's eye level, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with wearing a federal badge. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Sophia?" "A teacher," she replied without hesitation. "Like you, I want to help people learn things that keep them safe." As I hugged Sophia goodbye and prepared to leave the center, I realized that Rose's greatest gift hadn't been the inheritance money, or even the intelligence training that had allowed me to expose the Ashford criminal enterprise. Her greatest gift had been showing me that protecting others was the highest possible calling, that justice was worth any personal sacrifice, and that one person with courage and determination could change more lives than any amount of wealth or social status. Walking through the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood that had become my home, past the affordable housing where healthcare workers lived in the building that had once symbolized Rose's exile from her husband's family, I understood that I'd finally found where I belonged. Not in the world of old money and inherited privilege that had never wanted me, but in the much more important world of people who chose to dedicate their lives to protecting others. Teachers, nurses, social workers, federal agents, all of us united by the belief that everyone deserves safety, dignity, and justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. Early briefing tomorrow. New case might be bigger than Ashford family. Ready to save the world again? I smiled, typing back the same response Rose might have given 40 years earlier when she first decided to use her position in high society to expose financial crimes. Always ready. Justice doesn't sleep. Above me, the first stars of Christmas evening were beginning to appear over New York City. And somewhere in federal prison, Vivienne Ashford was probably still trying to understand how the quiet kindergarten teacher she'd dismissed as nobody from nowhere had become the federal agent who dismantled everything she'd spent her life building. The answer was simpler than she'd ever comprehend. Some people are born to accumulate wealth and power, while others are born to ensure that wealth and power serve justice rather than destroying it. I'd finally learned which kind of person I was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.